presentation.
So hello everyone. So my name is Tianyi. So I'm the representative of our research team. So Liori and Jackie are my PhD supervisors. So it's my great honor to be here to listen all of the wonderful presentation in this room. But actually, my presentation is a little bit different because we focus something about psychology, cognitive and developmental psychology. So not typography or anything linguistic to some extent. Okay, so before I answer the whole presentation, so I'm going to briefly introduce.
Sorry, speaker.
Oh, sorry, yes. So before I answer the whole presentation, is it good about voice? Yeah. So before I enter the whole presentation, so I'm going to briefly introduce the background of this area, literacy development and literacy acquisition. So actually, most of the studies in literacy acquisition and development is focused on English, so a deep and alphabetic languages. But actually, we still have some shallow alphabet languages such as Greek and Spanish, and also some logographic languages such as Chinese or something like that. So according to this, here are several questions raised. So first, how generalizable the evidence based on the English studies is. And the second is whether the different languages actually share some similar cognitive mechanisms. So based on these two research questions, and we have the presentation. So it's actually a brief overview and brief summary and of the recent published the articles. Okay, and the central arguments about this presentation, I would like to tell you now. So the central argument is we actually found a parallel and developmental shift from phonological processing to orthographic processing. So during the literacy development and the cross languages. So that's the central argument. Okay. So here's the outline. So the first thing about theoretical motivation. So I'm going to introduce briefly introduce. All of us knows that. So the alphabetical language and also the logographic languages, and also to say why it's necessary to compare these different studies across linguistics. And second, I will introduce the three main cognitive predictors of the literacy. So phonological awareness and rapid automatized naming, we usually call it RAM, and visual attention span. That's a very new concept. And third and fourth, and just to provide some empirical evidence of the reading and the spelling, and I wanted to give a brief conclusion of that. And final thing is the synthesis and implications for practice and theory. Okay, so for the theory, so we all know the words writing systems vary substantially in orthographic depth and visual structured. So on the left, so we can see there are alphabetic system. So for nearly all of the alphabetic systems, so there's one common rule, namely letters mapping to sound, or we usually call it grapheme phonemes correspondence rule. And some language groups are highly consistent with the rule, for example, the Finnish, German, Greek, Spanish, Hungarian, Dutch, etc. And then we call these languages as the shallow alphabetic languages. And as for some other languages are less consistent with this rule, for example, the English, French, and we call it opaque alphabetic languages. And as for the alphabetic languages, and we think, all of the researchers think, so the rating is largely sequential and sound-based because they have the rule. And on the right, so there's logographic system. So I want to use the Chinese language so as the representative. So for Chinese, so there's characters mapping to meaning. There's no letters, so there's no letters mapping to sound. And for Chinese character, so there are complex visual units. So it's not linear sequences of the letters, like the alphabetic languages. And each Chinese character usually carries the units of the meaning. And there's no obvious grapheme phonemes correspondence rule. That's the main differences between the two kind of the language systems. And we usually think the rating for the logographic system, the rating demands the holistic visual processing. So based on the main differences between these two kind of the language system, then we have the question. So do the same cognitive skills support reading and spelling and cross such different scripts? So if the answer is no, that means we probably need to explore this based on the different theoretical models. But if the answer is yes, we probably can find some overlapped area, so that may be easier for us to give some research later. Okay, so in order to answer this question, and I need to introduce the three main cognitive predictors of literacy. So phonological awareness, we usually call it PA. So that's go to access and manipulate the sound in spoken language. So for example, cat in English. So we know it has three sounds, k, at, cat. And some typical and classical phonological awareness measurements are phoneme deletion, phoneme blending, onset deletion, and rim deletion, something like that. And second is RAM, so rapid automatized naming. So that measures how quickly a reader can name familiar things, so including the letters, digits, or the colors. And we usually require the participants to give the oral report as quickly as possible. That's for RAM. And then for VS or VAS, so visual attention span, that's a very new concept. It's just raised by Boise and their research group in 2007. So it's very new. And as for the visual attention span, it actually refers to the scale about how many the discrete visual elements a reader can take in and within a single fixation. Okay, so it's actually emphasized the parallel processing of the orthographic units and also an indicator of the orthographic processing. So based on the dual model of ratings, we actually have the various kind of theoretical model, but here based on dual model because easier to interpret the results later. So based on dual model, so we believe the PA and RAN involve the phonological processing, while the VS actually taps the visual or orthographic processing. So that's some cognitive predictor. Okay, the central argument here. So we found the phonological processing underpins literacy, a cross-writing system. As literacy experience accumulates and orthographic processing, especially the visual one, visual orthographic processing, seems increasing predictive weight. So that may suggest a developmental shift in reading and spelling across languages. And we found for the early childhood, before the age of 10, maybe. So PA and RAM is the main predictor for the literacy. But after the age of 10, so the VAS becomes a stronger predictor for the literacy. Here are some empirical evidence. So for reading, and I just listed some important and some key publications here. So we found, so Wonderful et al. In 2015. So they found the PA and RAM predict the word reading fluency in grade 2. Although the VAS already has some unique variants. And Moore et al. In 2014, so they found PA and RAM predict reading speed and accuracy. The reading speed here is just reading fluency, just use different name in the article. So in English, French, German, Finnish, and Hungarian. So it's actually regardless of the orthographic dots. And as for Chinese, as a representative of the logographic system, so I just list a Yang study here. So they conducted a 3-year longitudinal study, and they found RAN, morphological awareness, and orthographic skills predict word reading across grades 1 to 4. Morphological awareness here means the skill to manipulate the semantic meanings. So that's quite something inclined to be the orthographic thing. But actually, because the Yang study recruit participants from Hong Kong, so nearly all of the participants used the traditional Chinese character. And actually, so the results they found a little bit different from some researchers in mainland China. For example, in Shu et al. In 2008 and Su et al. In 2017, they recruit children from mainland China. And all of the children from their study use the simplified Chinese character. And at the same time, in mainland China, they have the pinyin alphabetic system to help them to learn the pronunciation, but there's nothing phonological assistance from Hong Kong and Taiwan. So the results are a little bit different. So from some research in mainland China, Xu and Su found they also conducted a longitudinal study, and they found the PA is a long-term predictors to the rating. So overall, so we found the phonological and naming speed scales support both letter-sound mapping in alphabetic scripts and character learnings in Chinese. So that's for rating and also aged between 6 to 9. But after aged above 10, so here I want to emphasize the studies from Dutch. So wonderful, still wonderful. So compare the grade 2 and grade 5. So they found the VAS makes its own unique contributions to word reading fluency. So after controlling for PA, RAN, and nonverbal intelligence. So it actually may suggest a shift from the serial sound-based processing to parallel the orthographic processing. But actually, the similar findings have been shown in some other languages. For example, in Arabic, in the Avado et al. In 2020, in Chinese from the Wang et al. And Zhao et al. In 2020 and 2018, respectively, and some English studies from the Boise and New Lucky Series study, something like that. So why the VAS matters more later? So that's the most important thing. Maybe, so we just give this one reason because we don't know something about the cognitive and even the neuroscience. So we guess, so as children read more, they need to precise several letters at once rather than sounding out letter by letter. So this shift may be driven by the more reading practice and more exposure time, a longer and more complex task because they may have a more rigorous the reading requirements when they grow older. And actually that may be driven by moving from decoding to the fluent reading. So that's probably the reason. And similarly, for spelling, we actually find some similar parallel shift. So for the early childhood, the phonological skills lead the way, still the same thing. So we can find this from the English studies in English, in Greek, and in the 5 European languages, and also from the some other studies in Chinese. So the RAN dominates the Chinese spelling. But here I want to emphasize studies on the right, on the bottom of the right. So here, Liu et al. In 2016. So Dave said, so even without the letter sound mapping, the phonological and fluency skills still support early Chinese Chinese spelling and visual spatial attention as some unique variants by grade 3 that may be a very good groundwork to say the later importance of the VAS, so during the literacy development. Okay, and after the age of 10. So the VAS contributes uniquely to spelling in older children and across alphabetic and the local system. So here's some studies from Dutch, from English, and from Greek, and even from Mandarin. So here is a more striking results from the Mandarin. So Wang et al. In 2025, they just found the VAS as the unique variance after controlling for the phonological awareness, the PA, the RAN, nonverbal intelligence, and morphological awareness. So that's a really surprising result. Okay. So here is the schematic representation of the dynamic and sequential reweighting of cognitive predictor. But to be aware of that, so it's not a pooled effect size. I just want to draw it, emphasize your memory, something like that. So we can see for the two teal lines, so the PA and RAN are stronger predictors, probably before the age of 10. But after the age of 10, the VAS rises sharply. But it's actually, and we can see, so after the age of 10, and even from some numerous research, and we can find the PA and RAN are still significant predictor, just not important as it used to be. So after the age of 10, and the VAS rises. So that's the thing. And as for the theoretical interpretation, so why does this developmental shift happen? So one of the possible reasons is that the cognitive demands of reading and spelling change as the children developed. And when they are younger, so the children still need to learn how use the letters map to sound and or use the characters map to meaning. So they may rely more on the sound-based decoding and serial processing. But when they become the fluent reader and speller, so they can take in more letters or characters per fixation, and they can recognize the larger visual chunks at once and even handle the longer and more complex words. And at the same time, the VAS captures this capacity for parallel and visual processing. So it actually shows a developmental shift from a serial processing to parallel, automatic, and efficient processing. And that's the thing. And as for the implications for assessment, diagnosis, and intervention, so previously or usually we're going to use the age-appropriate phonological assessment or diagnosis for dyslexia or dysgraphia, actually. Maybe, so for some children, especially at the age above 10, so we can consider adding some visual orthographic assessments for the diagnosis, the informal diagnosis, and even the formal diagnosis. And even, so we can also consider adding the visual attention and trunk-based work, so as children grow older, so that may have a more efficient functions for the logographic systems. So for example, the Chinese, something like that. Okay. So yeah, very obvious as for the conclusion. So first, phonological processing is fundamental. So we can see the important predictions from the PA and RAM. And at the same time, even after the age of 10, so they are still very significant predictors to the literacy. And a second, visual attention span emerges from around the age of 10. But I don't want to say the age of 10 is the boundary. So we don't know. It's just found this age from the existing, the prior research. So they've used age of 10 as the boundary. So it's very interesting. And I want to say, okay, the visual attention span may emerge at the middle to late to childhood, something like that. And third, the developmental shift survives statistical control. So lots of the researchers actually emphasize the uniqueness of the VAS prediction. So after controlling for the numerous cognitive skills, so it's actually not a mathematical artifact or just specific to one or two language. And final thing is the pattern is cross-orthography. So we already found the similar results cross languages from alphabetic system and then to the logographic system. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow. We can take a few questions. Any questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. At the very beginning, you mentioned the fact that you sort of opposed the mostly sequential way of reading accuracy before some learning has been achieved in alphabetic system as opposed to logographic systems. I'm a bit skeptical about this, so I have a question about that. This exactly because when I was learning Japanese, for instance, I seem to recall having a hard time learning my kanji, obviously.
Yeah.
But also I seem to recall that there was some kind of sequential process in which I was sort of decoding the individual strokes, preferably in the order that they're supposed to be drawn. So I think my progressive and painful learning of the kanji involved something which was inherently sequential. So I'm wondering if native speakers do not process the learning like that. Is it because I'm a foreigner and it's not my mother tongue? Or is there some sequentiality as well for Japanese and Chinese people in the way they learn their ideograms?
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. So actually, I have a few knowledge about Japanese learning, but I think, yeah, there's definitely difference from the learning ways between native speakers and some other people, learners. So I think for the it's just based on theory, I would have to say. So based on the theory, I think the native speakers in Japanese may be more easier to learn that because, and I think they probably have some different ways. And at the same time, I'm not so pretty sure what kind of ways they've learned in Japanese, but from my knowledge, so yeah, definitely different. Okay, I'm sorry, but yeah, and only that's it for Japanese. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering, interested in VAS, because you mentioned about dyslexia, and of course, related to that is autism and Asperger's, and I was thinking I have some friends who is probably on the autism spectrum. When I look at the screen, it takes them a bit to find things. Whereas when I look at the screen, I can see the whole screen instantly. And so my VAS will be a little wider. And I was taught to read by learning the phonograms, like the groups of letters that make up each sound. So when I first began to read, I was reading in sound chunks, not in letter chunks. And then I was very quickly reading whole words and like even whole phrases at once. And so what do you think in early childhood helps the person to have a VAS that is very large? Because obviously that's a blessing for learning kanji, other Asian scripts, and, just navigating computers, driving even.
Okay, I see. So your question is, so whether the VAS may be important for the early childhood and how the large VAS can help them to acquire some literacy, is that question?
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, so for the alphabet languages, because they based on, just like I mentioned about the sound, so the character letters by letters. So they probably need to have a larger VAS once they grow older. So it's a kind of developing scale. So that means the adults usually have a larger VAS than the children.
Okay.
Yes, so that's really impossible to say, okay, the one child has a larger VAS, but they probably have the larger one when compared with their peers. So that's the reason, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we only think as long as they get more reading exposure, so they learn more, they're more familiar with the words or the letters, they can have the larger VAS because they can obtain a lot of things simultaneously. So that's a kind of, the skills can be cultivated.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing.
I see.
So that's probably the main reasons why age of 10 is a good boundary. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any last question? We still have some time.
As
Yeah. Very practical one. What are you actually measuring? How do you measure that? And how do you measure the fluency?
Okay, I see. Really good question, I have to say. So for VAS, for the first study about VAS measurements, they involve the global report and partial report. And they actually give, for example, 20 array, 26 consonant letter array to show this to the participant. So this from the first study from the Boise, but actually within the 20 millisecond presentation time, and then the array disappear and let the participants to give the oral report. All of the letters, try them best, as many as possible. But actually, lots of people think, okay, so this actually involved the verbal involvement, verbal processing, right? And so later, some researchers use the pure visual processing task, the visual one back, some visual visual working short memory task to measure the VAS. So I think the similarity of the visual attention span measurement is that they usually shows the stimuli within a short presentation and then disappear. I like the participants to give some report, silent report, oral report. So that's the key components of this overall.
And the learn is always linear.
Usually linear, because linear is always the reading habits they used to. So usually linear.
And how about reading fluency?
Reading fluency, that's quite easy. So we have the word reading fluency and sentence reading fluency. And we also have the oral word reading fluency and silent word reading fluency and silent and oral sentence reading fluency. So for the oral one, so we usually require participants to oral report, so the single word or a single sentences, and then we give the timer. So when they finished, and I've just stopped the timer and to calculate the fluency. So how many characters they get, and within this time or something like that. So it's a kind of the fluency. And as for the silent one, the participants are usually required to read a sentence in the screen. And once they finish and they press the computer keys, and then to judge so whether this sentence is meaningful or not, or something like that. So it's not quite fully about reading fluency, also involves some reading comprehension, but that's for some sentence reading fluency. So only for the all of studies. So we just focus on the oral and reading fluency, something like that. Because all of the researchers actually wanted to be a groundwork for dyslexia and dysgraphia. And one of the syndrome of dyslexia is whether the readers can give some correct oral report of the word. So we usually focus on the oral thing, oral word reading fluency. Okay, thank you.
Great.